Hi, I'm Sean Gorman and welcome to the latest instalment in our What Is series. Today's topic of conversation is Articles of Association. Now you may have heard those in relation to companies, but the question is, what is, or again I should say, what are Articles of Association? At the most basic level, Articles of Association is effectively a contract between the shareholders of a company that regulate their rights and obligations towards each other in relation to the running of that company. There are a couple of things that are worth noting about Articles of Association. The first one is that they are a matter of public record. So they get filed at Companies House, which means that anybody can go on and look at what they say if they want to. And that has upsides and downsides. The upside is that effectively if there are rights in there that you want people to know about, then they're a matter of public record, so they can see them. The downside is, of course, they're a matter of public record, which means they're not confidential and anything in there is visible to the outside world. But what kind of thing do they contain? Well, typically, in a very basic set of Articles of Association, you would have things like, what are the powers of the directors to run the company? What's the process for making decisions, both at a director level and at a shareholder level? What are the rules for how things are done? So how do they take a vote at a directors meeting? How do you take a vote at a shareholders meeting? That's the kind of thing that's normally contained in a normal, very basic standard Articles of Association. And in fact, the Companies Act actually prescribes a standard set called the Model Articles, which would be what your company would have if you haven't chosen to put a different set of Articles of Association in place. But it does get more interesting than that. If you want to think about what a more complex set of Articles of Association might have, say for example, if a company has equity investment from a private equity firm or a venture capitalist, or even potentially some form of angel or other third-party investment, that's where the interesting stuff comes in. That's when you could expect to hear or see some of those things that you might have heard about if you've ever been involved in these types of things before. For example, and this is the key thing, the most important thing, who gets what if the business is sold? And by what, I mean how much. So this is where this type of thing would be set out. It would talk about all the different share classes and who gets what in relation to each of those different share classes. And it has other kinds of rights in there as well, more complex rights, like are there preference shares? Do certain shares only get a share in value once a certain valuation is met? In the articles is commonly where those types of things would be set out. In addition to that, you'd have things like preemption rights, drag and tag rights, which we talked about in the last instalment, all of the rights that relate to when dividends might be paid and when distributions are made to shareholders. You have permitted transfers, good and bad leaver provisions, which no doubt will be the subject of a future video, anti-dilution provisions. But ultimately, and this is the bit to remember, there can be all sorts of rights and obligations in there between the shareholders. But what are Articles of Association? Very simply, it's just a contract between the shareholders of a company. And that's what they are. Thanks for listening.